Hey, it's Mike here, and today we're going to take a look around the world at something I've been interested in investigating for a while, and that is, how many vegans are there, really? We're going to try our best to get a level-headed estimate of the vegan population of various countries and globally. Some of those countries are going to be easier than others, and some have definitely been exaggerated. Without a doubt, the numbers are growing, and that's the most important point, but what do we really know? Okay, first off, surveys are not perfect. No matter what, we're going to be taking a sample of a population and extrapolating that to the whole population. We don't have nanorobots counting every single person who's vegan moment by moment, not yet at least. And there are many other limitations, like the sample size itself and what question were they actually asking. But for now, let's take our first stop around the world, and because Plant-Based News is based in the UK, let's stop in the UK. Plant-Based News itself did report on that massive 2-year rise in veganism that you probably heard about, and so we're going to examine that a little bit closer right now. This was referencing the newer CompareTheMarket.com survey on environmental habits called Cars Against Humanity to a slightly older Vegan Society survey, which had a completely different sample and was not asking the same people. The first survey by the Vegan Society asked 10,000 people in 2016 and got a result of 540,000 vegans. Compare the Market asked 2,000 people in 2018 and got 3.5 million people, or over 5% of the population, which is massive. I'm gonna have to rain on the parade just a little bit for a second. Dominika Piasecka, the PR person at the Vegan Society, said they, quote, "Would be delighted if this increase was the case, but realistically, we have no reason to think numbers have increased to that extent." She mentions that it was not a survey intended to determine the population of vegans. Instead, it was just one to investigate environmentally friendly habits. In particular, she says, quote, "There were no cross-check questions asked to confirm the self-declared vegan statement, and it was easy to misunderstand the question as asking about environmental habits rather than lifestyle choices." You know, they didn't ask things like, do you eat eggs? Which, if they say yes, obviously they're not vegan. There are many things that can go wrong with a survey like this. Perhaps they're accidentally selecting for more forward-thinking urban populations that are more likely to be vegan. Or maybe people wanted to appear vegan when they actually weren't. Hashtag stolen vegan valor. So it's likely that they either got an accurate number from an inaccurate sample, or they just got inaccurate answers. Either way, something's fishy. No offense, fishes. All this being said, I do think that the Vegan Society's number of 540,000 is out of date. Just a couple of Veganuaries would be pushing it closer to 70,000 based off their reported numbers. Looking to Google Trends for the search term vegan in the UK, we can see that it has grown 2.5-fold since the Vegan Society's survey. So if the interest on the internet mirrors the vegan population, then between 2016 and 2018, we probably went from 540,000 UK vegans to something more like 1.3 million UK vegans, which is still great. Not 3.5 million, but still great. All right, now we're going to look at my home country, which, despite what many people think, is not Canada, it's the USA. And again, we have a bit of a discrepancy between the surveys. Gallup did a poll in 2012. They randomly called up about 1,000 people and found that 2% of people were vegan. Then a couple years later, in 2014, Faunalytics did a survey of 11,000 people. That's more than 10 times as many people, much more rigorous, but they found that only 0.5% of the US population was vegan. And the number of vegans definitely did not go down, so either Gallup was a little exaggerated in their figure, or Faunalytics was wrong. Chances are Faunalytics was right because it was just such a large survey. Now let's move on to a newer one. You probably heard about a massive surge in vegans in the US that mirrors that of the UK. Well, from Research and Markets in 2017, their food trends report said, quote, 6% of US consumers now claim to be vegan, up from just 1% in 2014. That would be a lot of vegans. That would be 20 million vegans. The problem is they were not transparent in their methodology or their sample size. Heck, it costs $3,500 just to look in it, so it's kind of like looking at a black box here. We don't know where they got that 1% figure in 2014 either. It could be super rigorous. We just don't know. Looking at the Google Trends in that time period from 2014 to 2017, we do not see anything that would reflect a 6-fold increase. However, we do see a pretty impressive 2.5-fold increase. So if Faunalytics was accurate in 2014, that puts us at about 4 million vegans in the US, or 1.25% of the population, which I think is a fair estimate for much of the Western English-speaking world. Yeah, 1.25% might sound a little low, but remember, we're talking about all of rural America. We're talking about the entire South. Yeah, we might have some liberal cities with 10% of the population being vegan in certain areas, but rural Mississippi might have like 0.001%. In the end, we're looking at a range, whether it is Faunalytics with their 1.6 million, or my estimate of 4 million, or Gallup's 2%, which puts us around 6.5 million. Either way, it's growing, and that's what's important. All right, let's move on to the next country, which is Australia. I know many of you are Australian. The sad part is we don't have any hard data, any good surveys from there. The closest we have is a reported rise in vegetarians and low meat eaters from 9% in 2012 to 11% in 2016, but that doesn't really tell us that much about vegans. However, back to Google Trends, in Australia, we do see a five-fold increase in vegan searches from 2012 until now, which is huge. And if we take that 1.25% figure that I came up with earlier, we're looking at about 300,000 Australian vegans down under. All right, now before we move on to another country, there's something about these three countries that I want to mention, and that has to do with how I've heard many people say, oh, paleo is more popular than vegan. Well, vegan food and living, through some of the Google Trends up comparing paleo to vegan, and in all three of these countries, vegan is much more popular. The UK, the US, and Australia. Okay, moving on to the next country, which is Canada. Oh, Canada. Sadly, again, we do not have a super concrete vegan number, but the Vancouver Humane Society found that there were about 12 million Canadians that were either vegetarian or trying to reduce meat consumption. Not telling us a lot about vegans, so please next time ask a straight question. Hello there. Have you ever thought about possibly not consuming a little bit of meat any time in the last 5 years? That's like 40% of the population, Carla. Now that's progress. Sponsored by Canada. But I think Canada follows a pretty close trend to the US in terms of their dietary choices. So if we look at that 1.25%, again, that's 450,000 Canadian vegans. Now I want to move on to the interesting case of Israel. You may have heard some crazy numbers. You probably heard 5%. I've heard as high as 10 or 12%. But that 5% came from a Channel 2 News survey, which was likely not super rigorous or huge and could have possibly selected for a more vegan population. However, in 2016, the Bureau of Statistics in Israel found that the population was about 2% vegan. Now, assuming that that was an accurate figure as of 2016, it was probably the most rigorous. We can also look to Google Trends for Israel in terms of the term vegan. I know they speak Hebrew there, but still, it can show a proportional increase in interest. Well, it raised by about 50%, which puts us at 3% of Israel. And at 8 million people, that's about 250,000 vegans. All right, now let's move on to some other countries. We don't have time to look at the methodology of every survey here, and they will be linked below. But let's start with Austria. And in 2013, 0.5% of them appeared to be vegan, which is about 40,000 people. In Belgium, as of 2016, there were about 34,000 vegans. In Germany, as of 2016 also, combining two surveys, one that was 0.1 and one that was 1% of the population, we're looking at about 400,000 vegans. In India, we have an interesting case. The government said as of 2005, 1.6% of the population was not consuming any animal products, which is ridiculously massive, and that would be like 20 million vegans. We'll talk a bit more about that in a sec. In Italy, we have a range of 0.6 to 3% in 2015, which averages to 1 million Italian vegans. Seems a little high. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Then we got the Netherlands. As of 2014, we're looking at about 45,000 vegans, or 0.27%. Sweden, as of 2014, we have allegedly 4% vegan, which is super high, and that would put us up at 400,000 Swedish vegans, which seems high. Let me know if you live there. And finally, we got Switzerland, which as of 2016 appeared to have about 83,000 vegans. And I know this is not a survey, but in terms of my channel and other countries, I'm seeing a surprising amount of viewership from some countries such as Finland and Czechia and Romania and Greece, which is pretty understandable, but also Brazil, which is awesome. So, hey everybody. Hey there. Okay, so now we have to ask the question, what is the global population of vegans? No such information exists, so we're going to do some really bootleg estimations right here, right now. The first angle we're going to take here is the question, can we get a reliable connection between the population of vegans and the amount of Google searches for the term vegan within a country? We can then take the number search globally and figure out a global figure there, at least for the English-speaking world. With the browser plugin Keywords Everywhere, we can get a rough monthly snapshot of the amount of times vegan was searched in particular countries. Thankfully, they're ones that we have been investigating already. For the US alone, we are looking at about 300,000 searches for the term vegan each month. If we take what I think is an accurate figure of 4 million vegans in the US, then that corresponds to about 7% of the vegans. So there are 7% as many searches as there are vegans in the US. For the UK, there are about 60,000 searches for the term vegan a month. And looking at our various estimations for vegans, that 7% figure seems reasonable, so I'm going to stick with it. Now, globally, we have about 820,000 searches for the term vegan every month. And with that 7% figure, that means that we have about 11 or 12 million vegans in the English-speaking world. But in case you didn't know, only about 20% of Earth speaks English. And looking back to India, that would be 20 million vegans if their survey is right. But I think a possibly more accurate number is Jains. There are about 4.5 million Jains who religiously abstain from animal products. And there are also countries that don't necessarily have access to Google. Not that they're English speaking, but China has restricted access to Google. They also don't have a good term for vegan. But for some scale, if just 0.1% of China was vegan, that'd be like 1.4 million vegans. But I want to go at this from two completely different angles to try and get a more accurate answer. And that other angle would be adding up all of the countries that we've looked at, all the surveys we looked at in the video earlier. And that lands us at about 8.3 million without India. It'd be 28 million with India. And if we want to just count the Jains, which might be the most accurate, it's about 12 million vegans. However, that is throwing out most of the world. We're not counting South and Central America. We're not counting China or Southeast Asia, Russia, Africa, the Middle East. Basically, we're not counting most of the world. However, those areas likely have lower populations of vegans, and that's the reason that we have vegan numbers in these other places, because they have a higher amount of vegans. Now, looking at both of these incomplete pictures of the vegan world, which probably hover at around half or 2/3 of all of the people that are vegan, I think a fair number to throw out there would be that we have about 15 million vegans in the world, which is about 0.5% of the world's population. That's my best guess, at least. In the end, we need more data. We especially need more of those surveys that are over 10,000 people, which are likely more accurate. Given that a lot of the smaller ones, especially the ones that don't disclose their methodologies, tend to be super high, way higher than we would have reason to believe. You know, maybe they accurately reflect some urban areas, but probably not the countries that they're being extrapolated to. And if you live in a country that has no data, go out and make your own survey or reach out to a local vegan organization or start a local vegan organization and try and make one that has a good variation in the population and very clear questions and so forth. All right, once again, I'm not trying to be a buzzkill by shooting down those higher vegan percentages. We just need to take a level-headed look at this. And let me know down below if you live in one of these countries and if the numbers that I threw out there seem inaccurate, too high, or too low. And finally, feel free to follow Plant-Based News on all of those social media platforms. And of course, follow my channel, Mike the Vegan. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.